What if love wasn't just a feeling but a frequency that could shift biology, bend time, and stop war? 30 years after a forgotten war, a human general returns to an alien world and meets the girl he once saved, now a powerful emissary who declares she wants to merge minds with him. From political chaos to spiritual awakenings, from assassinations to miracles of evolution, they discover that their connection is not just emotional, it is transformational. Their love births a child with no fixed form, able to alter gravity with a heartbeat. A being that teaches an entire galaxy the one truth we've always forgotten. The universe doesn't evolve through power, it evolves through resonance. But if you were asked to merge your consciousness with someone from another species, would you dare? The crimson rings of Elizura floated above the twilight clouds like silent echoes of an ancient war. From orbit, the capital world looked tranquil, but Elavirex, seated inside the descent module of the VSS Horizon, knew better. His fingers tightened around the armrest, metal against scarred gloves. 30 years had passed since the great archival conflict, a war fought not just for territory, but for memory itself. And now, the planet he once bled for was calling him back, not with honor, but with mystery. The missing ship was called the Lunaris Echo, a civilian research vessel designed for deep atmosphere resonance mapping. It had vanished without distress signals, without orbital drift, without trace. More disturbing than its absence was the fact that its last ping came from beneath the sky vault, the ancient floating archives of Elizura. That zone was supposed to be inert, but Ella had learned long ago that nothing about the Ilari ever stayed dormant for long. The module hissed as it landed on one of the upper-tier platforms, polished obsidian extending in all directions, cradled in energy vines that pulsed with soft violet hues. A reception unit approached, silver-robed, faceless, and bowed. "General Virex," it said in the melodic harmonics of the Ilari language. "The High Envoy is expecting you." Ella stepped forward. His gait was heavy with memory, and every corridor they passed shimmered with phantom echoes of the past, burning banners from the rebellion, crystalline blood splattered on white marble, the sound of her scream in that moment when he first saw her. They reached the core garden, a place that hadn't aged. Still floating orchids. Still gravity-woven pools. And at the center, standing as though time had curled around her, was a figure clad in layered silks that shimmered like stars through fog. Her skin, a soft iridescent silver violet, glowed faintly in the twilight shade. Her hair, longer than he remembered, trailed like liquid aurora. She didn't turn when she spoke. "Elavirex. I wondered how long it would take for you to return, or if you would return at all." Her voice hadn't changed. It still carried that unnerving calm, like hearing a lullaby in the middle of a battlefield. Ella stopped, letting the silence drag before replying, "Solanya. High Envoy now, I assume." Finally, she turned. Her eyes, twin spirals of violet and ice, met his. There was no smile, only a knowing stillness. "Titles mean little. I am what I must be. But you were once a savior. Now they've sent you as a censor." He didn't answer her bait. "The Lunaris Echo. You know what happened to it?" A subtle tension vibrated in the air, as if the light itself hesitated. Solanya moved toward him, steps graceful, soundless. "What I know, Ella, is that the ship was researching harmonic anomalies near the sky vault. It never should have been allowed. The sky vault is sensitive, resonant, alive, in ways even your species has never dared to define." He narrowed his eyes. "You think the vault did this?" "I think," she said slowly, "that frequencies left untouched for millennia don't take kindly to being studied." They were now standing less than 2 feet apart, and Ella could feel it again, that eerie familiarity, the same one he felt when he'd pulled her from the collapsing archive spires 30 years ago, as the sky cracked with silent thunder and the rebellion's last screams echoed through the city. But it wasn't just memory. Something else pulsed beneath the surface, not emotion, but something older. A pattern. A rhythm. Her presence didn't just affect his thoughts, it shifted the air around him. The fabric of space between them trembled, imperceptibly at first, then with a pulse, like a heartbeat echoing through invisible walls. Solanya's gaze drifted to his chest plate, where his comm unit flickered despite being off. You brought your tools. Good. You'll need them. But not for the echo. You'll need them for yourself. For myself, he scoffed, masking unease. She stepped even closer, her breath brushing against the side of his jaw. The vault didn't just consume the ship, Ella. It mirrored it. Reflected something back. Something that shouldn't exist unless someone opened a frequency that wasn't meant to be remembered. He froze. A frequency. Yes, she whispered, the 13th one. Ella had heard of the legend. An ancient Ilari myth, 12 known harmonic frequencies govern the balance of physics, mind, and energy. But the 13th, if it existed, was forbidden. Said to create rather than reflect. Said to bind two consciousnesses into one. Her hand grazed the air near his armor, not touching, but close enough to interfere with the subtle kinetic fields. Sparks danced for a second between her fingers and the golden trim of his suit. I think it began when you pulled me from death, all those years ago, she said. And now, after decades, it's awake. The frequency. And it remembers you. Ella's vision blurred for half a second. The garden shimmered, distorted, then corrected. He clenched his jaw. Then tell me what to do. Solanya finally smiled, but it wasn't warmth. It was gravity. Start listening. And then, just for a moment, the entire courtyard hummed. Not through sound. Not through vibration. But through thought. An Elavirex warrior, skeptic, survivor realized that he had not returned to Elizara to find a ship. He had returned to find a forgotten part of himself. And whatever it was, it had never stopped calling. The council hall of Elizara was not built for echoes, yet the words of Solanya carved deep into every crystalline wall as though spoken by the gods themselves. Her voice had not risen in pitch, nor trembled in delivery. It had simply been, and that alone was enough to rupture silence into 1,000 fractals of disbelief. I request initiation of harmonized mind fusion, she said calmly, with Elavirex. At first, it was as though the chamber had stopped breathing. Then came the sound, a slow, collective intake of air from beings who no longer needed lungs to survive. The 12 elders of the Thenthea circle, draped in flowing cognition silks that flickered with mind light, turned to face her. Their antennae swayed like storm-touched branches. Their neural filaments pulsed in violent syncopation. Beneath their robes, the veins of bioluminescent memory flashed red, a sign of emergency cognition. Ella didn't move. He stood at the lower dais, barely lit, his breath shallow, unsure if he had misheard. Solanya remained where she was, not flinching, not blinking, framed by the council's sacred prism, her aura alive with a subtle corona of violet gold resonance. She looked not like a petitioner, but like a priestess returned to claim her ancient right. Ilari society had evolved past the need for marriage or pairing in the human sense. Instead, they had the unisensus, a binding of consciousness, rarely performed, even more rarely accepted. It was not symbolic. It was literal. Two minds would fuse at the quantum empathic level, their thoughts bleeding into each other, forming a new field of identity. To suggest such a thing across species, across frequency, was unthinkable. Until now. Elder Vorthiel rose first, his voice a low harmonic rumble. This is unprecedented. The Ilari unisensus right is reserved for compatible harmonics. Human neurofrequency does not allow alignment. Solanya tilted her head, just slightly. Then perhaps our understanding of compatibility is flawed. Elder Zine interjected, her crystalline voice layered with disbelief. Even if such fusion were possible, it has not occurred in thousands of star cycles. The last time a fusion failed, it fractured both minds irreversibly. I'm aware of the risks, Solanya replied. But I sense no instability. I sense clarity. I sense echo. Allah spoke then, his voice low, heavy. You never told me. Not once. I needed to be sure, she said, turning to face him fully. Sure that the pulse between us wasn't a remnant of rescue. That it was not gratitude, or trauma bond. But something deeper. Something woven into what we are, and what we are becoming. The council murmured in a language older than speech, a chorus of frequency tones vibrating through the crystal chamber, reshaping its very color. The walls pulsed from blue to silver to red, finally settling into a somber shade of gray. That meant judgment deferred. But the stirrings had already begun outside the hall. Through the resonance lattice woven into the air itself, the minds of Elizara's noble houses picked up the phrase. Harmonized mind fusion, with a human. Inside noble gardens, holograms shattered mid-air. In floating towers, ancient lineage algorithms recalculated their bloodline futures. In the cathedra of pure lineage, the obsidian choir began to sing in minor frequencies, a sign of societal contamination. The frequency field of the capital quivered. The atmosphere held its breath. And yet, Solanya stood unaffected. Or perhaps, unconcerned. Because something else began to happen, a strange ripple through the chamber, so subtle at first it passed as mere artifact. But then the ripple deepened. One of the neural anchors flickered, a gravely rare event. Then the ceiling lights pulsed once in violet. And Allah felt it, a pull behind his ribs. A thrum in his gut. Not pain, not fear, invitation. He looked up at her, realizing she hadn't come here to make a statement. She had come to trigger resonance. His suit vibrated faintly. The calm implants in his skull buzzed even though offline. His breath caught when the glyphs on her ceremonial robes glowed not from light, but from response. She was not speaking only to the council. She was speaking to him, through the frequency only they could feel. The 13th frequency. And in that moment, Allah realized he was already fused. Not consciously, not fully, but entangled. Like two notes played on instruments forged in different galaxies, yet creating the same chord. Elder Vorthiel's voice shook as he stepped back. You have already begun harmonization. Solanya's tone softened. He pulled me from death, once. Now he must decide whether to pull me into life. Allah took a single step forward. Not toward duty. Not toward love. But toward what had already started without permission. The signal buried inside them both since the day of her rescue was no longer dormant. It had awakened. It had rhythm. And it wanted to complete itself. The council fell into silence. No approval was given. No rejection. Only the understanding, the choice was no longer theirs. And outside, in the floating towers, the sky turned not gold, not red, but violet, a color only ever seen once before. when the first Ilari learned to love through mind. The gardens had changed. Not in structure, the architecture of Elizara's upper sanctum was untouched, as if preserved in a stasis of divine intent, but in sensation. The light moved differently now. Shadows stretched longer than the sun should allow. The air hummed with a sound just beyond the hearing threshold, like the memory of a song forgotten in sleep. Elavirex stood beneath a spiral bloom tree, its leaves phasing between states of solidity and translucence, and watched the ripples of distortion fan outward from his own chest. He wasn't breathing heavily, but he felt as though something else inside him was something newly alive, something reaching out. Across from him, Solanya moved without footsteps. Her dress, spun from reflective mind silk, responded to nearby thoughts, its patterns reshaping into fractals as she approached him. Each time they got too close, each time their biofields nearly touched the ground, would shimmer faintly, grass bending in slow undulations that had nothing to do with wind. Their private interactions had begun as brief debriefings, but quickly became something else. Not romantic, not yet, but biologically entangled. Whenever Ella made eye contact with her for too long, the implant in his cerebellum would pulse a warning, unable to categorize the neurotransmitter activity his brain began producing. Whenever she laughed, the local gravity would lighten by a fraction, subtle, but measurable. They had run tests. Solanya had called in a neutral envoy from the Cognitive Sciences Temple. 3 observers had arrived, a sentient recorder, a wavebinder, and a frequency historian. Each was equipped with harmonic sensors capable of registering reality state fluctuations at the molecular level. What they discovered in just the first 10 minutes forced them to request classified cloaking around the entire quadrant. Ella and Solanya, when in proximity within 6 meters, caused synchronized quantum drift in multiple substrates of matter, phase shifting in non-biological crystal, spontaneous lensing in ambient light, and most disturbingly, involuntary memory projection. When Ella had accidentally brushed Solanya's forearm, nothing more than a glancing pass, one of the observers suddenly collapsed. Upon recovery, she whispered the words, "I saw their fusion. I was inside it." From that moment forward, no external monitor would stay longer than 15 minutes at a time. What was occurring between them defied known science. Ilari neural fields were tuned to harmonic consciousness, their thoughts emitted subtle frequencies. But human neural architecture was different. Electrical, chemical, unpredictable. The notion that 2 incompatible systems could interlace not in metaphor, but in real-time resonance threatened to collapse the fundamental framework of known sentient biology. The historians scoured texts. One name appeared only once: ancient, forbidden, half-legend, the harmonic bloom. A time when 2 opposing frequencies, perfectly tuned by trauma and trust, fused to create not just a bond, but a bridge between conscious realms. It was theorized that those involved began experiencing existence not only as themselves, but as each other. Solanya had hinted at this during one of their walks in the lower atrium. "You don't understand what this is, Ella," she'd said softly, tracing her fingers through the fog veins of the memory fountains. "It's not romance. It's not proximity. It's alignment. The universe only allows this kind of contact when 2 frequencies forged across lifetimes begin to echo." He had replied without thinking. "Then why does it feel like we're becoming unstable?" She had smiled without joy. "Because that's how metamorphosis always begins. Through dissolution." And now, in the garden, that dissolution was underway. Ella found himself feeling things he couldn't own. A burst of clarity while watching the stars, feelings of ancient longing, of drifting in ultraviolet oceans, memories of not being human. At night, he would dream of smooth coral towers rising from gravity wells, then wake up with the taste of stardust on his tongue. His pulse changed its rhythm. His vision began to register motion in stillness, as if he could feel the oscillation of photons before they collided with matter. The council summoned both for testing. In a vacuum-sealed chamber beneath the Mind Core archives, they were seated across from one another, separated by an inch-thick membrane of solid light. No sound. No contact. Only gaze. What happened next caused the membrane to dissolve. Not shatter. Not dephase. It simply ceased to exist, erased by the resonance wave generated between their locked minds. The scientists scrambled. Instruments recorded an energy profile not seen in any known pairing, a pattern that spiraled into the 13th frequency. Solanya bled from one eye. Ella's skin glowed faintly. But neither blinked. Neither moved. They were becoming part of something they did not name. And in that instant, the Ilari Science Tribunal issued an internal alert. Subject pairing Ella Virek/Solanya now exceeds threshold for localized consciousness containment. Classified under Tier 5, Proto-Evolutionary Entanglement. Outside the chamber, the stars dimmed briefly, a strange cosmic fluctuation that synchronized across 3 nearby moons. The effects of their resonance had begun escaping the atmosphere. This was no longer a question of emotion. It was an event. A convergence. Or perhaps, a new species forming itself, in plain sight, between two once incompatible souls. It happened in the space between breaths, the moment between vibration and collapse. Ella was crossing the outer corridor of the Elisaron Thought Conservatory, eyes trained on the security stream in his HUD, when the first pulse hit. It wasn't light. It wasn't sound. It was absence. A void wave silence too complete to be natural spread out across the marble-etched airways. All comms dropped. Sensors glitched. The temperature dipped by 3 degrees in less than a second. That was the first sign. The second came through scent, ozone, thick and sharp, laced with copper. Then the shadow arrived, no footsteps, no warning, just a blur of broken outlines cloaked not in fabric but in active null space. A figure shimmered into reality above the central spire, a rifle shaped like a hollowed ether coil aimed downward with crystalline intent. Ella didn't think. His instincts took over before thought could follow. He was a tactician, a survivor, but when the bolt launched blue-white, spiraling in tight photon twist, he did not seek cover. He leapt. Not to escape, but to intercept. The shot never reached him. Solanya appeared from a side chamber, no armor, no shield, just a flowing dusk robe and bare hands shimmering with unformed light. But in that moment, her eyes locked on Ella, and something ancient, something never documented, fractured open. A membrane of light erupted from her body, not a wall, not a barrier, but a crystalline hex of spinning geometries, layers folding upon layers, so intricate they seemed to whisper. The bolt hit the shield and stopped. Not bounced. Not deflected. It simply dissolved into it, as if the energy recognized her as origin. Then came the backlash, not from the bolt, but from the convergence. As Ella's body collided into the expanding field of her projection, the two frequencies touched again, not gently this time, but violently, like galaxies colliding with purpose. And then they fell. Both were hurled backward by the resonance. Ella's armor hissed, overloading, as neural circuits sparked beneath his skin. Solanya gasped, collapsing onto a bed of soundless grass that bloomed beneath her on impact. For a moment, they were motionless, one cloaked in smoke and broken circuitry, the other glowing faintly at her core, threads of violet light escaping from the corners of her eyes. Medical drones arrived within minutes, followed by scientists, biologists, psychoacousticians. But when they approached, all of them froze. Ella and Solanya, though wounded, were changing. Not healing in the biological sense. Not repairing. But restructuring. Her hand, curled toward him, flickered with strands of harmonic plasma, a field of memory, of quantum coherence, and as his hand reached out in unconscious response, the air between them pulsed in concentric waves. The plants around them twisted toward the frequency. The sky above dimmed slightly, as if tuning itself down. Instruments overloaded. Neural telemetry became unreadable. One assistant, young and naive, tried to separate them by force. She collapsed immediately, not injured, but overwhelmed by a flood of emotional data that wasn't hers. She had heard a memory not seen, not sensed, heard it of Ella's childhood, of a song his mother used to hum before Earth's skies burned. But the memory had come through Solanya's skin. The chief researcher issued an immediate lockdown. What followed was classified for decades, two bioconscious entities, following synchronized trauma and protective inversion, initiated a full-wave field resonance repair. In simpler terms, they healed each other by tuning their minds together. It was not physical contact. It was frequency proximity. When their harmonic states aligned, even while unconscious damaged tissue began to regenerate. Cortical patterns stabilized. Cellular decay reversed. And most astonishing of all, foreign genes inside Solanya's blood began to recombine around new centromere pathways, with human data. The phenomenon was recorded as a historical first. Wave-merged cellular resonance regeneration. A process only theorized in cross-species psychoenergetic biology. Now proven. What none of the scientists realized, at first, was that this wasn't accidental. Solanya had projected the crystalline shield not through training, but instinct. And Ella had leapt not because of protocol, but because of sympathetic anticipation. Their brains, now partially entangled, had begun predicting each other's danger before it happened. It was not love. Not reflex. It was something stranger, adaptive evolutionary impulse triggered by harmonic interweaving. They weren't just bonded. They were converging. And as they awoke in the same chamber hours later, eyes meeting beneath quiet dimmed lights, a single frequency throbbed between their resting bodies, steady and strong. It matched no known wavelength. It held properties of thought, memory, pressure, and warmth. The machines couldn't read it, but they both could feel it. And somewhere deep in the sublayers of Elizura's data banks, the 13th frequency pulsed once more. There are no sirens in Elizura. When something dangerous emerges, the air itself shifts, pressure drops, resonance hums go silent, and light begins to bend just enough to make the soul feel watched. It began not with law, but with whispers. The crystalline gardens of the upper court began to echo rumors in their reflective pollen. Sound mirroring flora captured private conversations and inadvertently rebroadcast them in unnatural fragments. One noble heard her own thoughts repeated by a tree. Another claimed the mirrors in his chamber vibrated with the phrase harmonic hybridization. They all spoke of her. Of Solanya, the one who would dare fuse with a human, the one whose pulse glowed not purely violet, but with streaks of solar gold. And of Ella Virex, the outsider whose touch made the archives sing. To the conservative families, the line-bound houses, this was not evolution. It was contamination. They labeled it Trontan-Somao, a corruption of lineage, a collapse of psychic inheritance carefully preserved over epochs. They said her frequencies had been tainted by human entropy. That her mind had become porous. that she had become a carrier of collapse. Then emerged the Ancestrals, not a public sect, but a shadow formation hidden inside the lineage cults. Their existence had long been whispered but never proven. They held no seat in the council, no voice in debate. But now, their insignia appeared etched into the neural bindings of silenced scholars. A spiral carved backward, signaling time reversed, a desire to return to before humanity ever set foot on Elizera. Their doctrine was clear: the fusion of alien consciousness is not evolution. It is infection. Solanya's access to the Starloom archives was revoked. Her status as High Envoy suspended under cognitive instability review. Guards were posted at her private wing, not to protect but to observe. Ella, though still permitted to roam the scientific sectors, found doors subtly refusing to open. Elevators halting mid-air. Comms dropping when he spoke her name. The system, once curious, now rejected them like a foreign protein in an ancient bloodline. But not all voices turned against them. A faction within the Academy of Adaptive Consciousness called the Luminous Threshold Circle published a counter-thesis, Consciousness Entanglement Across Divergent Biologies, the Solanya Virex Proof. The paper described the post-assassination resonance event in terms never used before: a catalytic emergence of third-state identity between species. They proposed a theory, that the Ilari, rather than being the pinnacle of evolution, had long reached a plateau. That the real key to further emergence lay not in purity but in sacred interference. In harmonic dissonance that resolves itself into new states. This theory divided Elizera more violently than any war. In the outer rings, protests turned into Shinik standoffs. Shields of thought clashed mid-air. One demonstration outside the core reflection hall dissolved into a psychic storm when two opposing ideologues initiated a frequency duel. Dozens suffered memory fracture not because of physical harm, but because shared perception was ripped apart at the root. And in the midst of it all, Solanya and Ella sat together in the center of the atrium of first memory, not speaking, but sinking. Their bodies no longer pulsed with two rhythms. When one inhaled, the other exhaled an oscillation so precise it reshaped ambient light patterns. Crystals on the floor began forming symmetrical glyphs beneath their feet, not carved, but grown by resonance. One observer whispered, "They're not harmonizing anymore. They're generating." It was then that the most forbidden phenomenon occurred. As they sat in silence, the vault above them, the sky vault, keeper of all Ilari harmonic records, began to emit a tone. A singular frequency never recorded before. Machines panicked. Archives glitched. Sleepers awoke from stasis with tears in their eyes. The sound was not loud. But it rewrote the silence beneath everything. For exactly 33 seconds, all Ilari across the capital heard it, a new tone in the harmonic ladder. One that vibrated not outside of them, but inside their core. It had no classification. It had no translation. It had only a designation: Frequency X. The Ancestrals issued a kill directive that night. But the Luminous Threshold broadcast a counter-signal into the planetary harmonic net, a call for open frequency synthesis, a public challenge to allow fusion-based evolution to be debated, tested, and experienced. The planet's surface dimmed. And in that dimming, in that shared collective pause, for the first time in thousands of years, the Ilari found themselves standing at the edge of a mirror they could not control. And in the reflection was not death, nor purity, nor collapse, but the shape of something new. The resonance chamber was not built to hold what now stirred within it. Ella lay still, his breath shallow, eyes fluttering between awareness and trance. Solanya rested near him, her aura pulsing in a slow oscillation, once violet, now threaded with golden filaments. Around them, the crystalline walls of the chamber shifted hue in impossible gradients, ultramarine fading into silver, silver melting into pure harmonic white. Machines whirred quietly in the background, but even the instruments seemed reluctant to interrupt what had occurred. It had started the night before, not with intention, but surrender. A surrender not of flesh, but of field. Of letting go of species. Letting go of identity. In the darkness of the bioluminescent chamber, their pulses had finally synchronized beyond harmony, past emotional resonance, into something deeper, biogenic entwinement. And now, the aftermath shimmered in the air like vaporized memory. Dr. Tiến, a senior bioharmonicist, stared at the scan results in silence. The readings were impossible. Allah's frequency had not merely touched Solanyas, it had fused, warped, and imprinted itself into her neural lattice. But what defied explanation was the echo. A third pattern had emerged between them. Neither Allah nor Solanya. Something else. A new waveform. It did not follow the sinusoidal patterns of known biosignatures. It exhibited trispatial looping. Fractal divergence. And it was alive. The scan pulsed again. The waveform responded. "Doctor," whispered one of the aides, eyes wide, "it's sentient." The entire observation wing descended into chaos, whispered debates, emergency pings sent to the evolutionary tribunal, and calls for containment units that didn't yet exist. Because what had occurred in that chamber was more than fusion. It was spontaneous harmonic genesis. A singularity of emotion, thought, and genetic encoding that had produced a waveform capable of independent modulation. The luminous threshold called it the hybrid theorem. In theory, emotional resonance could create temporary alignment between species. But this was a violation of every model. Not only had Allah's human genome restructured parts of Solanya's core frequency storage, her genetic memory had adapted around it. Folded it in. Protected it. Nourished it. Her body had not rejected the foreign resonance. It had incubated it. The result? A living harmonic core, non-corporeal, for now, but projecting energy fields strong enough to warp the air around them. It flickered just behind her chest when she exhaled, a faint golden pulse, like a heartbeat that didn't yet belong to a body. Solanya whispered to Allah as he stirred, "We created something, not just new, but inevitable." And he felt it too, not as pressure or weight, but as a third presence nested between their thoughts. It did not speak, but it listened. It did not move, but it shaped the rhythm of the room. It had no name. But it had origin. Them. And then came the choice. Allah sat upright, disconnected from the neural monitoring lattice. The doctors tried to protest, but his voice silenced them. "If I walk out of here," he said, "this becomes history. 1,000 years of pure bloodlines, of interstellar diplomacy based on genetic control and harmonic symmetry, would unravel. The Ilari elite would declare an existential breach. The ancestrals would see it as proof of contamination. The council would demand confinement. And Earth's fragile relations with Elizara would fracture beyond repair. But if he stayed silent, if they erased the data, hid the scans, and let the waveform quietly extinguish itself, they could return to the illusion. No war. No upheaval. No hybrid. Solanya reached for his hand. "They'll say we broke natural law," she said. Allah stared at the glowing thread beneath her skin, golden light coiling around violet like a living equation. "Maybe we did," he answered. "But maybe natural law was waiting for someone to break it." The resonance pulsed once between them, stronger now. It had heard. The breach didn't start with violence, it started with silence. Not a quiet that soothed, but a stillness too perfect, like breath held by the world itself. It was just after twilight, when the mind-glass towers of Elizera hummed their nightly harmonics, that the command override infiltrated the inner council servers. One by one, security shields collapsed without alarm. Surveillance vision blinked. And above the city, the Hall of Astral Doctrine dimmed its beacons for the first time in 5 millennia. Then the purge began. Drones shaped like ceremonial guardians descended into the Citadel sanctuary bearing not weapons of war, but relic-sealed null rods designed to erase harmonic signatures. The operation was surgical. Political. The council would call it a containment enactment. But in truth, it was a cloaked coup fabricated under protocol breach, designed to eliminate Solanya without public reckoning. Allah didn't wait for authorization. He moved before the drones reached the Eastern Arch. With him, 3 neutrally Larry scholars from the luminous threshold circle, frequency theorists, not soldiers. But they had studied the ancient bio-passages and they knew where she had to go. Only one place on Elizera could bend frequency away from central control, the core of the Thanthian mind Loy then Tam, the bio-conscious heart of the planet, forbidden to all modern Ilari. Only primal lineages were permitted there, or those whose resonance matched the first beings. And somehow, Solanya now did. They moved under the cover of field collapse. As external systems failed, Allah's armor stripped of formal signature became a stealth core. His eyes saw impulse, not light. Behind him, Solanya radiated like a half-silent star, her breath in sync with the humming of the ground beneath her feet. She did not ask questions. She already knew where they were going. She had dreamed of it long before the war. The path to the Loy was not linear. It was layered. Frequencies twisted reality into spirals as they descended tunnels that shifted direction based on thought. One corridor looped back into itself 5 times until Solanya whispered a forgotten word, and the air peeled open like skin giving way to bone. At the final threshold, the atmosphere thickened. Not with pressure but with memory. It bled through the stone. The walls pulsed with the dreams of ancient species. Allah saw glimpses, winged beings made of coral and starlight, cities grown from Chinook fungus, twin moons singing to each other. All echoes. All ancestors. All, watching. And at the core, she waited. She had no name. Her form was fluid, sometimes a woman of endless hair, sometimes a mirror of Allah's own face, sometimes nothing but a swirling storm in humanoid silhouette. She did not walk, she resonated, each step leaving behind a trail of harmonized silence. The ancient guardian. You entered a place that does not welcome hybrids, she said without moving her lips. Her voice unfolded directly into their bones. But one of you carries a tone that has not been heard since the first divergence. Solanya stepped forward. Is it the 13th? The entity tilted her head. The chamber shook subtly. When emotion is pure enough to rewrite frequency, she said, a convergence occurs. Not of DNA, not of intention but of purpose. Love that alters the lattice of being. It has happened before. Once. She turned to Allah. It was you then, too. He blinked. I don't understand. Your species loops, she replied. Your consciousness returns. Always with a different skin. But the signal remains. You are the echo bearer. The one who calls the bridge into form. Behind her, the core began to thrum, a spiral engine of light forming above the platform. Ancient harmonic rings turned, each representing a sentient species long gone. But now, one of the rings responded to Solanya. And another never seen before responded to Allah, The rings aligned. They feared this, the guardian whispered. Because they build power upon separation. But your fusion was written in the deep code of this world seated before your bodies were born. The 13th frequency is not rare. It is simply forbidden. Salanya's eyes glistened with violet fire. So what happens now? The entity stepped forward, reaching her hand toward the waveform floating between them, the golden resonance child still without shape, still growing. It begins, she said. Again. And as her fingers touched the waveform, the planet sang. A note rose from the ground, so ancient it bypassed ears. It moved through time itself. The minds of those above, even the ones sent to kill, paused mid-strike. Machines glitched. Air pulsed. The harmonic field of Elizara shifted. Not shattered. Realigned. And from that moment on, every soul attuned to truth could feel it in their spine. The 13th frequency had returned. It was not night, and yet the sky darkened. It was not an eclipse, not in the way astronomers knew it, but something deeper. A folding. A soft, impossible curvature in the fabric of perception, as if reality had decided to hold its breath. The Elisaron vaults trembled. Above them, the stars bent inward. At the convergence point of the two moons, Vale and Enar Salanya lay suspended within the grave matrix bloom, a structure woven of living crystal and echo-responsive fiber. Around her, the chamber pulsed not with light, but with intention. Every breath she drew caused the chamber to shift color from violet sorrow to golden awe to a deep, iridescent stillness. Allah stood near, not as a protector now, but as harmonic anchor. His frequency, human yet no longer entirely, had been stabilized to tether hers. She was beyond language now, beyond linear time. Her body phased intermittently into translucence, showing not blood, not bone, but layered waveforms coiling into spiral geometries. She wasn't giving birth in the physical sense. There was no dilation. No pushing. No pain. She was releasing. And what emerged was not a cry but a soundless pulse that shook the base of the chamber and made every crystal in Elizara emit a single unified tone. The same tone. All at once. Then he appeared. Silion. Not crawling, not wrapped in cloth, but hovering, a coil of light and mass, condensed into a form that shimmered like memory underwater. He had no fixed outline. His skin was not skin. It was reactive field, semi-plasmic, semi-conscious. One moment, the child looked vaguely humanoid. The next, he dissolved into a halo of charged particulate. Around him, gravity thinned. Objects in the room began to float, slow, delicate ascension. Instruments untethered. Plants lifted. Water curled midair in perfect spheres. Time began to bend. Not forward, not back, but inward. The scientists watching from the outer node scrambled to recalibrate their readings. None of the known spectrometric systems could measure him. His mass fluctuated between 3 and 85 kilograms depending on observational angle. His bioluminescence was off-spectrum. He did not breathe. He pulsed. And yet he radiated affection. Where a normal infant might cry, Silion resonated. A low, contented hum that synced with Allah's heartbeat even across the chamber. When Salanya reached for him, her fingers phased through his field and came out luminous. Her arm trembled. Not from strain but from recognition. They weren't just touching their child. They were touching the embodiment of their union. The mathematical resolution of every divergence that had once kept Ilari and humans apart. A living theorem of what love could do when it was not a metaphor but a biology. Silion was not born from flesh. He was born from resonance validation, the moment where dual species harmonic entanglement produced a field stable enough to think, to shape, to become. He floated to Allah. The room dimmed as he passed. The floor glowed beneath him in soft pulses. As he hovered before his father, a single gravitic thread extended from his core and touched Allah's chest. It didn't pierce, it merged. For a second, Allah saw through Scileon's perception, multiple timelines converging, stars singing in color, languages formed from gravitational ripples, species rising and falling in spirals of memory. When it ended, Allah was crying. Not from fear. From awe. Because for the first time in recorded history, a child had been born not as a new member of a race, but as a bridge, a semi-living equation made of field, feeling, and choice. His frequency did not align with Ilari. Nor did it mirror humanity. It oscillated between. A hybrid not of blood, but of truth. Outside, the eclipse ended. But the darkness lingered. Because the planet knew. Elizera itself vibrated at a different bass tone now. Every harmonic tower had to be retuned. The old songs no longer aligned. Scileon's birth had introduced a new constant. His very presence altered the gravitational slope of any room he entered. When he slept, the fabric of space gently curled toward his form. When he laughed, things remembered how to float. Salanya, still recovering, whispered a name known only to those who studied ancient Ilari prophecies. Kaiba, the born field. Allah nodded. The universe just changed. And no one's ready for what that means. But Scileon was already smiling, and around him, reality began to curve, beautifully. They called it the mindquake. But what rippled through Elizera was not of the body, it was of the deep architecture beneath thought. A wave not of matter, but of unconsensual resonance, targeting the planetary frequency substrate itself. It began at 2:11 core time. The skies folded into mirrored hexagrams. Oceans withdrew from the shorelines by precisely 13 meters. The planet's harmonic axis shifted by 0.03 degrees. And then, everything fell silent. No birdsong. No mechanical hum. No pulse from the orbital choir arrays. Just a single note, flat, infinite, broadcast into the minds of every sentient being on the surface. Then came the breach. Not from above, not from armies, but from inside the field. Thought forms constructed from broken consciousness, fragments of exiled minds from the ancestral vault, surged into the Elisaron psychic net. They were not soldiers. They were distortions, creatures of intention stripped of identity, manifesting as holes in memory, voids in feeling, echoes that consumed inner clarity. Where they passed, people forgot their names. Forgot how to love. Forgot why. It was not war. It was ungluing. And in that moment, the only resistance came from those who remembered something stronger than defense: connection. Allah stood at the center of the confluence arch, eyes closed, breath sinking with Salanyas across the harmonic spiral grid. Their minds, already fused through weeks of deep resonance, now opened further. No longer just two frequencies, but a looping field, a feedback lattice that spiraled around the capital like a living veil. It did not block the mindquake, it transmuted it. The emotionless assault became empathy. The invading wave that was meant to fracture instead became meaning. The distortions were reflected back into themselves, restructured by Allah's inner memory: his love for Salanya, his awe at Scileon's birth, his pain, his longing, his humanity. The very traits the ancestrals despised became the filters through which the invasion lost form. And then the second field ignited. Salanya extended her palms outward, and her skin glowed not with light but with timeline. Her aura unfolded into fractal petals that extended kilometers outward. They overlapped with Allah's field, and for a moment, every being on the surface of Elizara could feel what it was like to be loved without condition. Infants laughed in their sleep. Old ones remembered songs. Machines halted, confused by the input of soul. But even then, the wave was too large. Too many points of entry. Too many fractures. The ancestrals had encoded their assault into every layer: digital, harmonic, mythic, dream. Something else had to respond. Something not bound by language. And that's when he rose. Silion had no voice yet, no words. But his form floating above the grave matrix sanctuary began to oscillate with impossible frequency. His body flickered through phases, from light, to silhouette, to nothing, then to field. The moment he phased into pure wave form, every sensor across Elizara collapsed. Instruments fried. Gravity reversed within 4 kilometers of the epicenter. But no destruction occurred because the energy was intentional. Silion's pulse moved not through space, but through meaning. A single spherical burst of semi-luminous, semi-conscious energy unfurled from his core. It didn't explode, it harmonized. Where it passed, distortion collapsed into clarity. Creatures made of forgetting began to weep. Minds fractured by centuries of fear began to remember sunlight, memory, song, the touch of a loved one long past. The mind quake faltered. Not because it was defeated, but because it could no longer find resonance in a world now remembering itself. Allah fell to one knee. Salanya leaned on the arch of memory, tears burning violet streaks down her cheeks. Silion hovered, silent, radiant, new. The planetary net realigned. And in the galactic observation grid, a new notation was filed into the archive of force classifications. Force type, sentient emotional refraction. Name, Silion pulse, type 0 harmonic reversal. Effect, converts intention to synchrony. Converts assault to communion. Status, first recorded instance. And just like that, the war ended. Not with victory. Not with surrender. But with redefinition. The universe had seen power expressed without destruction. The archive marked it, not as a battle, but as the first known instance of defensive enlightenment. The chamber had no walls. Only light folding in and out of itself like breath drawn through 1,000 stars. Suspended at the nexus of the Galactic Harmonic Council, the Unity Spire floated amidst rings of gravitic equations carved in starlight. This was not a place of politics anymore. It was a place of wavelengths made real, a cathedral of sentience where decisions were not argued, but felt. And in the center of it all sat two figures, quiet, timeless. Allah's hair had grayed into shimmering steel, but his presence was more stable than ever. Not rigid, but anchored. Salanya, now a living archive of emotional resonance, glowed with a calm that bent the space around her with every blink. Neither needed introduction. Their identities had surpassed language. For 20 years, they had lived at the resonance horizon where memory, matter, and meaning spiraled into fusion. Before them stood their son, not as a child, not as a savior, but as something altogether other. Silion, the boy born from wave form, now a being who didn't just feel emotions, he translated them into bridges between stars. He had no fleet, no weapons, no armies. But he had synchrony. And it had changed everything. In the last decade alone, 39 species had surrendered their defensive doctrines after 1 hour of exposure to Silion's presence. Several ancient empires had shifted from hierarchy to harmonic guidance, based solely on feeling what he felt. He did not negotiate. He did not convince. He simply was. And where he went, walls forgot how to stand. A species from the helix rift long thought uncommunicable now sang duets with Earth's cetaceans. A crystalline race from Andorra IV dissolved their monarchy after sensing, through him, what guilt truly was. And the war-born Brakta tribes, wept, for the first time in their 4,000-year history. He stood now before the council, not to ask but to declare. I bring not a theory, he said, voice vibrating across spectra both audible and buried deep beneath consciousness. I bring proof. Love when refined, harmonized, and allowed full wave form becomes not a symbol, but a structural force. The council fell into a silence that wasn't silent but charged. The equations began to rewrite themselves in the surrounding air. Scileon raised one hand. In that moment, hundreds of beings from gas forms to neural colonies to carbon flesh felt the same emotion. Not identical, but synchronous. Their core frequency pulsed in phase. Suspicion evaporated. Species that had been at war in genetic memory found their guards lowering not from reason, but from recognition. Because what Scileon emitted was not rhetoric. It was the frequency that loved. Behind him, Salanya whispered across the link to Allah, "Do you remember the moment we touched minds?" And Allah smiled not just with lips, but with timeline. Every field since then has been an echo. The council did not vote. Instead, they resonated. A new law was carved into the unified archive not in language, but in wave form. Principle 0, love, when fully harmonized, is the only force capable of simultaneous defense, creation, and transcendence. Designation, Universal Evolutionary Carrier Wave. Term, the Scileon Constant. Galactic travel would no longer rely solely on mathematics. Diplomacy would no longer be chained to logic. Evolution, from this point forward, would not be driven by adaptation to violence but adaptation to empathy. And in the centuries to come, when distant civilizations spoke of the moment the universe bent inwards and remembered its soul, they would not mention armies, or conquests, or flags. They would speak of a child who floated above the world glowing not with power, but with the love that created him. And the two who dared believe it was possible. In the end, it wasn't war that reshaped the universe. It wasn't technology, or strategy, or dominance. It was two beings willing to feel fully who gave birth to a frequency strong enough to harmonize entire civilizations. Their child didn't carry weapons. He carried understanding. And that was enough. Now we ask you. If you were Allah, would you accept the merge? If you were Salanya, would you risk your entire species for one unprovable emotion? Which part of this story struck you the deepest? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If love truly has frequency, we want to feel yours. And if this story resonated with you, subscribe to the Alien Storyverse. Because the next story will explore a darker question. What happens when the frequency that loved us begins to forget?